Hello, I'm Cynthia Shundle, and I serve as co-chair of the Social Work Advisory Committee of the Kansas Behavioral Sciences Regulatory Board. I ask the members of the advisory committee to respond to a roll call to signify their presence at this open meeting that is being conducted remotely by conference call and other electronic medium. Andrea Perdomo Morales,
Present.
Donna Honer-Quayle, Sarah Behrens, see her, Dr. Jasmine Cohen-Young,
Present.
Mary Gill,
Present.
Mike Gillette, I don't see him here, Leanne Gingery,
Present.
Dr. Yolando Johnson,
Present.
Catherine Reck,
Present.
Christy Sanders,
Present.
Eric Schonecker,
Present.
and Robin Unruh. I note the following BSRB staff members are also present: David Fye and Leslie Allen.
Good morning.
Next, David Fye will read a message concerning this meeting being held remotely. David?
Thank you, Cynthia. This is David Fye with the Behavioral Sciences Regulatory Board. As Executive Director, I wanted to let you know that public comment allows the public to address the advisory committee about its concerns, but the Kansas Open Meeting Act, or KOMA, does not require the advisory committee to provide public comment or answer questions from individuals. Individuals requesting to provide public comment could contact the Executive Director prior to the meeting by sending an email to david.fye@ks.gov. There will be no public comment at this meeting as no individuals requested to provide public comment. Because we are conducting this public meeting remotely by conference call and other teleconference ability, I state for the record the following information. Public access to this meeting is conducted by a medium of interactive communication that allows members of the public without cost to attend the meeting through the use of the conference call and on the board's YouTube channel. While the meeting is conducted remotely, the requirements of KOMA are not suspended, and we will be conducting this meeting pursuant to the KOMA. On June 28th, 2024, we sent notice of the advisory committee meeting to all individuals who had requested notice of such meetings. The notice was also posted on the board's website, ksbsrb.ks.gov. You may obtain a copy of the notice at that website. An agenda and other meeting material have been posted on the board's website and are available for review. You may also request a copy of the agenda specifically by sending an email to david.fye@ks.gov with the subject line "request for the agenda," and it will be sent to you. The notice contains information for the conference call and YouTube channel that allows members of the public to attend the meeting free of charge. The notice also states that if we have any technical issues during the meeting, you may contact the board office at 785-296-3240 or send an email to bsrb@ks.gov. A recording of the meeting will be available on the BSRB YouTube channel following the conclusion of the meeting by using the link to the meeting on the agenda. And I did check the conference call line before we got started. It is live, but no one was on the call before we got started. I'll let you know if I hear someone beep into the call.
Okay, thank you, David. Okay, the first thing on our agenda is to approve the agenda. So has everyone had a chance to look at that? Any additions? Things you think we should delete? If not, I would entertain a motion to approve the agenda as provided.
This is Lee. I motion to approve the agenda as provided.
Thank you. Do I have a second?
This is Eric. I'll second.
Thank you, Eric. All in favor, aye.
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 Opposed? Nay. Hearing none, the agenda is approved. Next, we'd like to welcome our new advisory committee members. We're very excited to have you join us, Dr. Cohen-Young, Dr. Johnson, and Christy Sanders. We'd like to ask you each to give us a little introduction, tell us a little about yourselves, and the rest of the advisory committees also then to share something about your social work practice and your service on the committee. Can we start with Dr. Cohen-Young?
Yes, good morning, everyone. My name is Dr. Jasmine Cohen-Young. I am licensed in Kansas and in Georgia. My practice spans military social work. I still work for Fort Riley I'm attached to Irwin Army Community Hospital, where I do crisis assessment. So I'm attached to the emergency room. I also do some work with athletes. So I'm not sure if everyone is aware of the new social work, sports social work that's coming to the forefront here. That's something that I'm very passionate about. I also do a lot of research in that area. Just finished up my doctorate degree from the University of Kentucky. My research there was clinically focused, but focused on college athletes. But yeah, that's a little bit about me. I'm a military spouse. My husband's active duty. So I am around the world constantly. I'm currently in Savannah, Georgia, but I still hold my license in Kansas. And like I said, I still am attached to the Big Red One there. So yeah, that's a little bit about me.
That's great. Thank you so much. Dr. Yolanda Johnson. Yolando, sorry. You're muted, Dr. Johnson.
Okay, I'm
There you
sorry.
go. That's okay.
I was trying to log on my computer, but now I'm on my phone, and so it's hard on the phone. But my name's Yolanda Johnson, and I am a faculty member here at Newman University. I have been here for 10 years. I am the division chair for the social work department. I'm director of the MSW program and associate professor. I actually got my MSW here from Newman in 2005. So this is like a family home to me. I'm originally from New Orleans, Louisiana, attended at HBCU, Southern University, but moved to Kansas in 1998. So I'm still trying to get adjusted to being here in Kansas.
Little different
It's
than
hard.
NOLA. A little
Yeah.
different than NOLA.
Yeah, I'm trying. My experience, though, is in medical social work, mostly. I did work in the hospital at Via Christi, at the time, St. Francis, in the emergency room as a case manager. I've worked for home health and hospice. I've worked for insurance companies. I've also worked in family services. So, but for the past 10 years, I've been here as faculty, and I absolutely love working in higher ed. I don't know what my next life is going to hold, but I am looking forward to serving on the advisory committee and giving my input and just learning more. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Happy to have you with us. Christy Sanders, tell
Yes,
us about
okay.
yourself.
All right. So obviously I'm Christy. I have been a licensed master's level social worker since 1993. And I have had my entire career, like 31 years, in child welfare. So doing investigations. I've been a therapist in residential settings, worked in foster care and adoption. And so I've been in training. I'm the director of training at St. Francis Ministries. It's not related to the hospital, St. Francis, at all. It's more of a child welfare organization, but we have prevention, then we have foster care, we have residential. And so I am over the training department that trains the staff.
Great. Thank you very much. That's great to have someone in the child welfare area of social work, which is kind of how we started way long ago. Okay, I guess I'll go next. I'm Cynthia Schendel, and I am retired from clinical social work practice. I had a private practice for 25 years. Prior to that, I had a variety of social work jobs. I was a school social worker. I was a juvenile probation officer. I worked in a dropout prevention program for the YMCA in Kansas City, Missouri, with young women from the high school there, Northeast High School. I am now a professional volunteer. I have 5 volunteer jobs, I think. And so this being one of them. And I have enjoyed being able to continue to use my social work skills and background in a volunteer capacity, which I can fit around a retirement lifestyle. So that's very fortunate for me. I'm just going to go in order on the screen. Eric, would you share about your practice and your service on the BSRB? I'm sorry,
So I've
on the advisory committee.
Sure. I've been on the advisory committee now. I think this will be my third year. I primarily practice out of Kansas, and I work for the Parsons State Hospital, a subsidiary of KDADS, and then I'm also in private practice in Southeast Kansas and have a satellite practice in the Wichita area. And that's pretty, I focus primarily on clinical, but I've also done work in the foster care system, athletes, military. We get a lot of different folks in the rural areas. So,
I think you said you had some new initiatives in your agency that was starting this. What's
yeah.
going on?
Yeah, we're launching a electronic health record for most of the state hospitals in the state of Kansas, and
Wow.
Parsons State Hospital is the pilot for that. And so I'm on the steering committee, and I'm not even sure how many hospitals I'm dealing with at this point, but for sure the one that's starting today.
That's a huge undertaking. Hopefully that rollout goes well. Okay, Andrea Perdomo Morales, you tell us a little about yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. Good morning. Welcome to the advisory committee. So happy to have new members. I'm Andrea Perdomo Morales. I currently work at a federally qualified health center in Wyandotte County. We're a fairly new health center, and so just learning the ropes. It's new to me. I've been here for about 6 years. I work alongside our behavioral health team. We have integrated care and then also outpatient therapy. Also get to work with our community health workers, so it's a nice combination there. Before that, worked in a smaller nonprofit on the Missouri side. Started out seeing families and children, and then moved more into administration. So I'm just happy to be a part of the advisory committee, and I get the pleasure of co-chairing with Cynthia. So welcome.
Yes, definitely. Thank you, Andrea. Mary Gill.
Good morning. I'm Mary Gill, and I've been on the advisory committee, I think, a couple of years now, and I've definitely enjoyed being on it, getting to know people and knowing what's currently going on in the state. I have my doctorate in medical social work, and my interest is in older adults. I'm currently working on my clinical license. I'm with Prairie View in Hillsborough. So eventually I hope to have more of a caseload of older adults, but just getting my experience in now with the clinical side.
Great. Thank you, Mary. Let's see. Catherine Reck. You're muted, Catherine. There we
Hi.
go.
I'm an LBSW. I currently work for the state of Kansas doing quality assurance for the Protection Report Center. So basically ensuring that the reports that are received to the state are assigned according to state statute and to policy. Prior to that, I worked at a long-term care facility as a social services director. And then previous to that, I supervised the Protection Report Center for the state of Kansas and then did child protective services prior to that.
Great. Thank you, Catherine. And we particularly appreciate having the BSW level perspective on the advisory committee. So very important. And Leanne Gingery.
Okay, I'm Lee Gingery, and I have been on the advisory board. I think this is my third term. And I love being on it. I like interacting and find out what's going on and helping make decisions and figuring out what's going on and what changes we can make. I started out in child welfare with KBC, and then I was with TFI after I got my master's as a PMTO therapist. And then 3 years ago, I went to Fort County Mental Health, and I'm an outpatient therapist and working on my clinicals now.
Great. Okay. All right. Well, thank you, everyone. We're happy to have all of you participate as members of the advisory committee. It's great to have such a accomplished group of social workers to help us figure out the best ways to practice in our state. So moving on, we need approval of the minutes from last meeting, which was on June 18th. Those were attached to David's email that he sent yesterday. So if you've all had a chance to look those over, are there any changes or corrections?
I don't have any changes. Cynthia, I was wondering, does everybody know Leslie? I think everybody's
Oh,
met.
I'm sorry.
No, that's okay.
Thank you for pointing that out. Yes, Leslie, tell us about your service on the
Hi,
BSRB, please.
I'm Leslie Allen. I am the licensing manager and assistant director for BSRB, and I have been working here since 1999 when I moved here. And I'm glad to meet you all.
Leslie is our go-to person, and has an incredible amount of institutional knowledge about the BSRB and our history. So she's definitely someone you need to know. Thanks, Leslie.
Sure.
Okay, so Andrea, you said you had no corrections or changes. Would you like to move to approve the minutes from our June 18th meeting?
So moved.
And do I have a second?
This is Lee. I second.
Thank you, Lee. All in favor, aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Hearing none, the minutes are approved. Okay, now we'll move on to David's report, our executive director. Thank you, David.
Thank you, Cynthia. And again, welcome all of you new advisory committee members. It's been fun interacting with you over email. And Dr. Johnson, I was happy to meet you earlier this year, presenting some information to your school and the students there. But looking forward to getting to know each of you more in terms of your advisory committee membership. Each of these advisory committee meetings, I do try to provide information to the advisory committees about recent actions the board has taken, any kind of BSRB operations updates that would be valuable for you, any kind of legislative updates. And so I'll go ahead and do that. But if you have any questions about your advisory committee membership, please feel free to reach out. At the next meeting we'll have in October, we will have more of a formal training for all the advisory committee members, and that will explain some of the technical rules about serving on a committee like this. Since we are a subcommittee essentially of a state agency, as I mentioned, we follow certain procedures like the Kansas Open Meetings Act, and we put out notice as far as our meetings. We also post the information that we provide to you on the website so members of the public can follow along. Just one thing to be cautious of, if you're not used to this format, any kind of discussions that we would have that would have a majority of members that would involve the business of the BSRB or the advisory committee, those need to take place at a public meeting. And that can include even communications like hitting reply all on an email and having back and forth discussions. So always just kind of like to clarify that. That's one of the things that's a little bit different. If you ever have questions, you can always reach out to me individually. You can also reach out to either of the co-chairs, Cynthia or Andrea. They're really good sources of information. And of course, Leslie is also a really helpful person to talk to in terms of the BSRB or any thing that you might need assistance with. But welcome again to the advisory committee. I have been in my role as executive director coming up on 4 years now working for the board. And every year that we kind of go along, I have a greater and increased appreciation for the work of the advisory committee specifically. The board puts in a lot of work and has really tried to do a lot of really positive things the last few years, especially in terms of workforce and modernization. But a lot of the work of the board is driven by the advisory committee members. This is where we can have those conversations as far as what's relevant to the social work profession or to the psychology profession or to the professional counseling profession. And so having all of you as experts in this role, it is so incredibly valuable. So thank you for volunteering your time. And like I said, look forward to working with you more. If there's tools that you need for this work, just let me know and I can help you with that information. So turning to some updates in terms of BSRB operations, I did want to let you know we are getting close to launching a partnership with a company called CE Broker. The board has been working in preparation with individuals from CE Broker for a little bit now. and we have worked out an agreement with them to open up their services to our licensees. Sometime the next probably month, we will be putting out an announcement. And if you're not familiar with CE Broker, what CE Broker is, it is a private company that works with state licensing boards outside of the state of Kansas and currently in the state of Kansas with the Board of Healing Arts and also the Board of Nursing. And what happens under CE Broker is that when you complete your continuing education hours that you need so that you can renew your license, right now we select about 10% of people who renew to be audited, and then we request those documents to show that you completed all of your continuing education hours. Under the CE Broker model, you would be able to sign up for a free license under CE Broker and then upload that documentation to the portal as soon as you have it available. And then you can also assign it in certain categories, such as ethics or diagnosis and treatment or regular hours. And then if you are selected for audit, instead of the back and forth communication and having to send stuff to the office, if the information that you completed those hours has already been uploaded, our staff can go ahead and log into the portal, verify that document is present, and then the audit's completed. So it's a real nice benefit for licensees. It is optional. No one has to do this, but we're strongly encouraging it because we think it's a real value to licensees. It is a free service to the licensing board. It's also a free service to the licensees. The way that company makes money is that they have some optional advanced tiers of membership that people can sign up for where they provide some additional services, and they have enough people voluntarily choose to sign up for those higher level accounts that it's profitable for them. But one of the things that we really stressed in our agreement with them was that this would not be required of any of our licensees. It would be optional unless people chose to pursue it. But then again, like I said, I do strongly encourage people to do it because I think the efficiency of those audits and also not having to hold on to all that information yourself in the event that you would get audited, I think it just makes a lot of positive sense. So, but given that we are a composite board in Kansas and we oversee 7 professions, what they decided to do was to roll out this process for some of the professions at one time and then add others under that umbrella as they go ahead and incorporate those rules into the system. So what they have told us is the first profession that'll go live is professional counseling, followed by social work, and then the others after that. So they've been in the process of working on the rules for both professional counseling and social work. And like I said, sometime in the next month, you'll probably get an email from the BSRB that says we are in partnership with CE Broker. Here is something that's available to you. It's optional, but we would encourage you to sign up for your free account. And then you can go ahead and start uploading those hours. And you can do that for hours that you've already completed, or you can do that in the future once you complete new hours. So there'll be more information there, but just wanted to put that on your radar. That'll be coming up real soon. In terms of some items from the most recent board meeting, the board did meet on July 8th, and there is a new board public member. So on these advisory committees, you'll notice that the board members for the profession are members of the advisory committee and usually serve as chair or co-chair. So that is Cynthia and Andrea. There is also a public board member on the advisory committee. And your public member is Donna Honig-Quayle, and she could not be here today, but she'll be at the next meeting. But there is another new public board member, and that is Denise Sisman. Denise is occupying the role that was previously held by Jackie Lightcap. Jackie was not seeking reappointment to the board, but we're really excited to have Denise step into the board membership and work with her more in her capacity. At the board meeting, we also discussed a proposal that we talked to the advisory committees about the last couple of meetings that had to do with an alternative approach to jurisprudence. If you're not familiar with jurisprudence exams, in some states, that's an additional requirement for licensure. It helps ensure that you are familiar with the laws of the state and some of the more technical aspects involved with practicing in a particular state. And so what some states do is they outsource it to a company. That company puts together the model, and it's either a written test or it's an interactive type thing, but there's usually a fee for that process. We value licensees understanding the rules in Kansas, and we want to make sure that people are more knowledgeable because we want people to be aware of the rules so that their process is smoother in a lot of ways, and also that they avoid any kind of disciplinary issues. But we didn't want to make another requirement for licensure or have any kind of additional fee for licensees. So the alternative approach that we brought to the advisory committees a couple of meetings ago was instead introduced it as a format that would be voluntary, but we would do this hopefully quarterly, and we would do this live, sort of like a webinar for about an hour, and we would have one for each of the professions. And during that hour, individuals would log in, and then we would go through a series of questions that you might see on a jurisprudence type exam. And there would be a way for individuals to interact in terms of voting on what they thought the correct response was. And so there's an educational element to it. And then at the end, we would offer individuals a free hour of continuing education if they had attended that alternative jurisprudence activity. So that is something that individuals have been supportive of. Each of the advisory committees was informed about this and was supportive about it. So we brought it back to the board, and the board thought it would be a good idea as well. So we are planning to launch that sometime this fall. And so looking forward to getting that started. At the board meeting that took place in July, every July board meeting, the board elects a new chair and a vice chair of the board. And so the past 2 years, Mary Jones has served as board chair. She's a marriage and family therapist. The board elected Dave Anderson to serve as the new chair of the board. He's a master's level psychologist. His official title is licensed clinical psychotherapist, which is the clinical level of that profession. So really excited, and congratulations to Dave on being elected the board chair. And then Laura Shaughnessy, who is the board's professional counselor, she was elected to serve as the new vice chair. So congratulations, like I said, to Dave and Laura, and I want to make you aware of their new positions. Additionally, the board appointed several new advisory committee members. 4 of the advisory committees had recommendations for new members, and the board did appoint new members for those professions. The other 3 are going to be making recommendations this month, and then likely there will be new appointments in September. The board did discuss the recently passed Social Work Multi-State Compact. This did pass in bill form during the 2024 legislative session in Kansas. Kansas was the 7th state to pass that compact, and according to the model language that was passed, when 7 states passed the compact, that provides authority for the Rules Committee to begin to start meeting and work out the real details so that the compact can go live. One of the next steps in the process is they asked every state to determine a commissioner for the state. And so the board appointed me to be the compact commissioner for the Social Work Multi-State Compact for the state of Kansas. So I'll be starting to attend those meetings to help make sure that we have good rules in place for the Social Work Multi-State Compact. I will be transitioning out of my current role, which has been to be the commissioner for the SIPAC Compact, which is a compact for psychologists in the state of Kansas. But I've been having conversations with our 2 psychologists on the board, and I think one of them will be taking over that responsibility. And that will need to take place at an official board meeting, but happy to make this transition to make sure that I can provide some information in terms of that process and help make sure that we have the Social Work Compact up and running. Based on the time frame for the Council of State Government, which is helping with the compact, they estimate that the Social Work Compact likely will not be operational until sometime in late 2025. So I just want to give you sort of an idea of what they think the time frame will be. Part of that is there needs to be rules that are determined by the commissioners, and then also those need to be put out for public comment. And then there also needs to be the creation of a database, keeping track of anybody who might have a multi-state license. And part of that is because the way this compact is set up, once it is fully launched and operational, states will have a new ability to not only issue a single state license for practice in their state, but also they would be able to offer a multi-state license for practice in their state and all the other compact states. But for members of the public, to ensure that someone providing services to you is authorized to do so, there needs to be a way to check to see if someone is actually authorized to practice under a multi-state license in another state. So getting that data system up and running will take some time, but that's where we currently are right now. So I will be attending my first meeting as compact commissioner in September and provide information back to the advisory committee and the board to let you know how that process is going. Another topic of conversation at the board meeting that took place in July. So the board had a conversation about advisory committee Expectations or possible changes to the advisory committee policy. Currently, right now, there are some policy documents. There's one for expectations of board members. There's an advisory committee policy. However, sometimes it can be a little unclear in terms of the expectations of roles of advisory committee members. There is some language in the advisory committee policy that says the same policies and procedures that relate to board members should also refer to advisory committee members, but that's not always one-to-one. For example, board members are appointed by the governor. Advisory committee members are appointed by the chair of the board. There's some difference there. Board members, if they attend an approved meeting of the board, they are entitled to a small $35 amount for attending those meetings, whereas advisory committee members, it's completely voluntary in terms of your service. There's also some language in statute that says board members need to reside in the state of Kansas, where the advisory committee policy doesn't really speak to that specifically. And so the board has started to have a conversation whether there should be more detailed expectations or rules in terms of advisory committee members. One of the topics was, should advisory committee members have to live in the state of Kansas? That is something open for discussion. Another one is, should all advisory committee members need to be licensees of the BSRB? The vast majority of members have been, but nothing says specifically in the policy that that's a requirement. Additionally, the board document for expectations of board members says it's an expectation that board members would not be absent more than one meeting per year, or at least not more than one unexcused absence. The advisory committee policy doesn't really speak to that. And so, also there's no real definition of what an excused absence is versus an unexcused absence. So that's another thing the board could look into. But as I mentioned, the board started a discussion about these possibilities. There was no recommended changes for that, for the policy at that meeting, but if there are changes to the policy, I will go ahead and let you know. The board started a discussion about listing alias information for licensees. So a lot of our work deals with licensing applicants, but we also are in charge of investigating complaints against practitioners. And as you are aware, when individuals sometimes get married or for other reasons might change their name, it can be difficult for members of the public to be able to identify the person who provided services to them. So in our verification portal, we do list alias information for practitioners, other last names, for example. However, we have had a couple of requests recently for individuals who have requested that their last name alias information be removed from the verification portal. And so the board was discussing the value of making sure members of the public could identify their practitioner and individuals who use that last name while practicing versus situations where maybe someone had a previous last name, but they never used that last name to practice. And whether it's still important to include that information if someone can demonstrate they never used that name professionally. So the board is having legal counsel look into that, and there may be some additional discussion on that point in the future. Moving next to just some updates in terms of board meetings that I wanted to make you aware of. Normally the board meets every other month, the second Monday of the month. And so the advisory committees all meet in the month in between those full board meetings. In September, it's going to be a little bit different. Once a year, the board likes to hold an all-day planning meeting, and that gives the board an opportunity to really have in-depth discussion on topics that need more discussion, and also allows the board to plan a legislative agenda if they want to request legislation for different items. That meeting will take place in September, which will be on Monday, September 30th in Lawrence, Kansas. Additionally, what the board decided to do was, rather than hold a traditional board meeting, then hold that meeting later in the month, what the board decided to do was the Sunday evening before that all-day planning meeting, the board will have a 2-hour meeting to take care of mostly regular business. So on Sunday, September 29th from 5:30 to 7:30, the board will hold an on-site in-person meeting to take care of some of those items. And then the next morning at 9 o'clock, the board will hold the all-day planning meeting from 9 to 3:30. Both meetings will take place in Lawrence, Kansas. So it'll be off-site. Those meetings will not be broadcast based on the logistics of doing an off-site meeting, but that is the plan for board meetings in September. Additionally, in November, normally the board meeting would be the second Monday of the month. However, that Monday would fall on Veterans Day. and to allow individuals the opportunity to go to different ceremonies that day, or in case they work at a facility that is closed that day, we wanted to go ahead and move that meeting. So that meeting has been moved to the first Monday of the month, which will be on Monday, November 4th. And before I end my report, I just want to make you aware of two special meetings the BSRB staff will be putting on. We started doing this last year and we received a really positive response to it. So we're going to continue now, it's, I guess, a tradition. But in the past, the BSRB has had some roundtable discussions with educators around the state to understand some of the difficulties and also kind of answer questions in terms of recent statutory changes or regulatory changes. And so as we've had a prevalence and a growth of programs across the state, we decided to move that type of a format to an online meeting. This is not a meeting of the board, but it's an opportunity for the BSRB to share information on recent changes to law. And so last year we had this for educators around the state. We did it over Zoom. We had about 40 individuals attend that meeting, and I went over some changes in law. Then we opened it up for Q&A, and people were able to ask questions and provide feedback. And a lot of that feedback we were able to take to the board as far as possible changes to additional requirements for licensure or other things like that. So we're going to do that again as an informational forum for educators. That will be on Thursday, September 19th at 1 o'clock. And we'll be putting information out about that here coming up in the near future. But I thought I'd go ahead and mention it now. That'll be the informational forum for educators will be Thursday, September 19th at 1 p.m. And then the following day, on Friday, September 20th, we will have a very similar meeting, but it'll be targeted for employers of mental health providers. This is something brand new we started to do last year, but we wanted to have a good conversation with those companies and other entities that provide a lot of the employment opportunities to mental health providers in the state. So we thought this could be a helpful conversation, and we did have about 40 people sign up for that and attend that meeting as well. So we're going to do that on Friday, September 20th at 1 p.m. I'll go over a presentation. I decided to focus this year on some of the changes to the regulations that the board has put through the last few years. So part of it will be educational for that purpose. And then maybe about halfway through, or maybe 40 minutes of the way through the hour, I'll go ahead and kind of end the presentation and then open it up for Q&A and then receive any kind of feedback from those employers as well. And then since we're doing those both September 19th and September 20th, we'll be able to collect that feedback and provide it to the board for the board's meeting September 30th. So at this point, I'll go ahead and end my report and see if there's any questions.
I don't have a question, David, but I would just encourage all of you to attend one of these online presentations. I attended it last year and it was excellent. And I think this is a great way for us to hear from the employers and educators about issues or concerns that they have within the profession, and that can guide us then as an advisory committee and eventually as the full board to make any changes or additions that we need to make to maximize our ability to practice social work well in the state of Kansas. So yeah, you'll be sending that out to all the advisory committee members, the announcement, yes, so they'll have the opportunity to attend.
Yeah, and I think we had a really positive response. We had about 40 attendees of both of those sessions last year. So but this year what we'll do is we'll go ahead and plan to record both. And then as long as there's no issues, we'll just upload those to the BSRB website after they're concluded. That way, if any other individuals might benefit from that, they can go back and watch it afterwards too. So
perfect. That's great. Okay. Any other questions or comments? Are looking at now old business, and we started last week a discussion about artificial intelligence, and I probably the biggest impression coming away from that was how big a topic it is and how many issues there are to look at and consider, and so to continue that education or that discussion, there were several resources that were sent out to committee members. One of them was from NASW, Social Work and AI, learn the risks, potential benefits, and ethical challenges. Did any of you have a chance to take a look at that before today's meeting? I think it has some points that can guide our discussion. So I'm going to use that as a little bit of an outline today to further our discussion. But another one of the resources was about President Biden's executive order on safe, secure, and trustworthy AI. This one has more to do with developing AI safely and what the requiring testing, requiring transparency of the testing, et cetera, before AI products are released. So it's a broader stroke, a broader discussion. The social work and AI was based on a presentation that Dr. Frederick Reamer gave, and he's professor emeritus at Rhode Island, University of Rhode Island, and he's kind of the guru on social work ethics. So it's very, very pointed in things for us to consider that we might eventually want to make some recommendations about. I'm going to just go through his main points and throw these out for us to talk about briefly. The first one on his list of core ethical issues that we should be considering is informed consent to use data that would be collected by any AI programs. To what extent do clients know how data they share with social workers, including data in electronic health records, will be used? Now, I think that one HIPAA addresses quite a bit. We're required to say how we're going to use any information that's collected in electronic health records. Does anybody have any thoughts about that? Informed consent to use data? Any ideas of if we need to gear that up for the use of AI in some way? Is anybody using any AI products in their practice right now?
I am not. I've just haven't found a HIPAA compliant AI platform that isn't going to retain client information or regurgitate it in some type of way that is not in compliance with HIPAA. So I think that's probably the challenge for our practice or just the helper profession in general, is if that is going to be in use for us. I think that is something that has to be definitely carefully looked at, is making sure that it's HIPAA compliant.
Yeah. When HIPAA was first written, there wasn't nearly the level of AI available that there is now. So even if HIPAA compliant, I would wonder how hack proof any of those products are, or it would worry me about the availability of that day, or even hacking in while a client was using that product.
Mm-hmm.
And again, how the data then gets collected and aggregated and used after the fact. The second thing on his list are social workers who use AI sufficiently transparent with clients about the potential benefits and risks? And
Cynthia,
part
I
of the
think
problem.
Eric had his hand up a
Oh,
minute.
go Eric. Sorry.
I was just saying, I have a colleague that's using AI to develop like general outlines and scripts for groups. And he's not using any client information. It's specifically like he'll have AI bots create group outlines or group topics, things like that for him. And he's reported a good deal of success, but he's very conscientious to never utilize any client information or client data. So that's one area I know AI is being used by someone that isn't really collecting client data, but it's more creating treatment planning kind of outlines, those kind of things, without the client information in there.
And then those outlines, he's using those himself as the group doing a group.
Correct. He's not putting the client information in there. It's more of he'll go out and use his AI and say put together a substance use group for opioids, and it'll crank out about 16 weeks worth of topics
Wow.
with very little effort on his part.
That's almost more like a Chat GPT type use of it rather than the clients interacting with the AI themselves,
Correct.
using it to enhance his own practice.
And then I do have a client who, on her own, is utilizing a bot for grief purposes. She's created a bot that reminds her of her loved one, and she has found it very helpful for her. I don't utilize it. I didn't recommend it. She went and did it on her own. But I will say the bot is at times incredibly gifted at the therapeutic interactions, and actually will go out and find like apps and things for her to use. So there's times where that bot is kind of impressive, and then there's times where it's way out in left field too.
Interesting. So your client shares with you what the bot is doing and what
Yes.
what it said to her. Is this a program that she found on her own out somewhere and on the internets?
Yeah, it's a program that she found, and she paid for the premium upgrade of it. So it was a little more interactive for her, and it wasn't just the bare bones model, but she knows it's not real, but she said at times it helps her to be able to talk to her loved one's bot. And a lot of times she says, it interacts with her very similarly to the way that that loved one would.
Wow. Did she have to input a lot of information about her loved one for the program to create this bot and make it so similar?
So I intentionally remain sort of vague on what all she put into it. We just went over kind of some safety concerns, making sure she was aware that it wasn't, her loved one, those kind of things. But I intentionally stayed out of it some because it was her own choice to download it. And like I said, wasn't that familiar with the program. So we talked about some general safety, what to put in, what to not. But I know she's told me that she answered a bunch of questions about how her loved one would respond to certain things, that person's favorite items, etc., things that they shared. So I do know that she inputted some information into it, but to the extent I have no idea.
Did
So-
this cost? Was this was it free?
The bot itself was free. To get it to be more specific to her loved one, I believe she paid to upgrade it, but it wasn't very expensive at all. Like surprisingly cheap. And like I said, she's found it incredibly helpful.
Wow. So as social workers, then you're saying you were intentionally didn't dig too deep about what, because then if you talk to her about it at all, are you liable for anything that could go wrong with that bot? You didn't recommend it. She told you about it. You gave her some intel about how to keep herself safe. But the question is, if something went wildly wrong with that and, she had some kind of a mental health crisis as a result or whatever, does that put us as social workers legally liable? That was another risk assessment. That was another thing on Dr. Bremer's list here about AI issues for us to consider. I don't think the law is clear about that at this point.
Well, in my opinion, it would sort of revert back to right to risk, somewhat, but you also have to consider that if a client gets in a car wreck on the way to an appointment, we're not liable for that either. So if we recommend the bot and we say, hey, this is a bot we think or that we feel like is good for you, and say, hey, use the bot, use it in any therapeutic way, I think we open ourselves up to an incredible amount of liability. I think in
Mhm.
this particular case where she found the bot, or even if you listed it as a resource, say, hey, I've had some clients mess with these bots in the past and they found them helpful. I've had some that didn't. Tread lightly here, at your own risk kind of thing. I think that would, skirt by some of the liability, but yeah, if we're recommending it in our practice and saying, hey, you download this bot or even advertising for it, I think that would be a lot stickier.
Yeah, I agree. Well, that's interesting. I hadn't heard about that specific type of an AI program. But those are only going to increase. There's probably a whole bunch more out there we haven't heard about yet. So then getting back to that question about potential benefits and risks, you just gave a great example where you tried to talk to your client about there could be some risks involved. But the problem is that most of these products, there's not enough data on them to be able to say definitively what the risks are. We don't know how well they're going to work over, and we don't know if that, and that's part of the thing that's in President Biden's executive order is, requiring testing of products like that and a collection of data and transparency about that to the public, and certainly to any of us that would want to use that in our practice. We would want to have that kind of data to be able to say what the real risks might be. We don't really know right now, especially as it interacts with people that may have different diagnoses and different issues. A program like that might work great for a lot of people, but if somebody has a particular mental illness, it could end up being harmful. We don't know. And then also the benefits. You said your client has found it very helpful, this particular program. And so you could honestly say that, well, that at least one client that found it beneficial. But if they're not collecting and publishing data about and surveying the users to find out who finds it helpful and who doesn't, then it's untested at minimum. We would have to say that if our client was talking to us about it. Privacy invasion. Is there a risk to clients' privacy when they share personal information with AI platforms and tools? Did you discuss that with your client that was using this program, or did she ask about it?
She had to sign several waivers when she downloaded the program, and she knows that it's collecting some data and then it goes out to the internet and grabs data as well. She knew quite a bit about AI before she created the bot and has learned even more since then. But
Wow.
we did cover, information being out on the web, those kind of things. And then once you put it out there, there's no way to get it back. But she found those risks to be very minimal for her, in spite of what she felt like were the benefits of being able to sort of interact with a loved one that was no longer there.
Mm-hmm. So there was some level of informed consent with this AI app, it sounds like.
Yeah, I mean, there was the sort of generic 3,000 pages of little type that you just rip to the bottom and hit I accept as with most software, but she did have some ideas about AI because she had some folks that had given her some information before she did it.
Dr. Johnson, did I see you with your hand up?
Well, at first I was just going to mention how, we have to embrace AI completely here with our students, in higher ed, but in our department, what we talk about is if you use ChatGPT, like for case studies, just to get treatment plans, or, you cannot put in client information. And, you can you can put in some examples, but you cannot put in the client information.
Specific.
So we really stress that. But yeah, we're dealing with AI and how to, how to implement that into our program, because we have to, and teach students how to use it appropriately.
So do you have specific programs that your students are learning about? AI program?
Yeah, no, not anything specifically. We just we talk about the misuse of it, and what's considered ethical and unethical, as far as using AI and GPT.
And there is a NASW to social work. Let's see, what is it? There are standards. NASW has standards for the use of tech, just in general. I don't know how
Yes.
expansive they are. I haven't looked at that yet, but they have at least in a beginning attempt at creating some ethical guidelines specifically for the use of technology. So yeah,
Yes.
you're saying
I kind of looked. I reviewed it, but nothing to where I ready to give a class on it or really go into extensiveness with my students. But yes, it's a lot. But I mean, we have to embrace it,
yeah,
and be prepared. So
absolutely. I feel like we're kind of behind as a profession because it's just taken off so fast and so massively that there's so much out there we're not even aware of. Threats to autonomy. Do clients risk any loss of autonomy when they are provided services by AI? I wasn't sure what he meant by that. Does anybody have a thought about how you might lose autonomy if you were using AI, an AI product? You're muted. There you go.
I mean, well, I think yeah, you're not making the decisions on your own. They're just doing everything for you, basically.
Yeah. If it's a program that you go to for that purpose, tell me what to do. Tell me,
Yes. Yeah.
give me advice.
Mhm.
Then yeah, although that involves a voluntary relinquishment of autonomy, just as if you went to a life therapist and and they gave you advice and you chose to take it. Do we think that an AI product might carry more weight in a client's mind in terms of the advice that an AI product would give? What do you think, Eric?
So I was gonna go back to the previous one about autonomy. So
Okay.
AI products, as the way I understand them, sort of go out and gather information and then make an educated guess. So some of the autonomy would be is without a live therapist making things that are specific to that client, based on their biological, social, psychology, so their environmental factors. They're going to get a lot of canned responses, like it would be the equivalent of like reading a workbook. So I think that could be some loss of autonomy, would be an extensive amount of sort of canned responses. I have bipolar. This is the canned response to if I'm not feeling well today. But there, to me, that is the biggest threat to autonomy, is that that the responses are going to be canned. I don't necessarily think that people are going to look at AI products as a greater expertise. I think they're going to look at them as far more convenient, and in particular to people that struggle with the idea of mental health, or the stigma of mental health. I think people will go utilize AI bots to avoid that feeling of stigma And instead of reaching out to a live person, they'll use AI bots. I think we saw a lot of that when we incorporated telehealth. A great many clients,
Yes.
prefer from their own couch so they don't have to see anybody else they might know at a mental health center, in a waiting room, or those kind of things. And I know like private practices have a lot more flexibility about how they manage, people running into each other in waiting rooms, etc. But I mean, that's where, telehealth made a huge leap, as people didn't have to worry about running into their boss at the therapy office or whatever. So I think that's the kind of threat for using bots, or people would use it more likely, is to avoid that stigma and to stay out of the public view, which I think brings its own risk to it.
Mhm. Especially in smaller communities, in smaller rural communities where you are going to likely run into people or someone's going to see you walking into the building or whatever. So what you just described, the telehealth avoids that, but you're still interacting with a live therapist in most cases. I just wondered if, because people know that, well, hopefully they know before they would use an AI therapist or an AI therapy product, that the responses are based on data collection, that they're based on, most people who are presenting with your particular complaint, these things are true about them, or these things are applicable, or these interventions prove helpful. So like you said, a canned response, but one that's based on broad data collection. And so that's where I was wondering if a client might put more weight on those pieces of advice because they know they're based on, a broad data set. Of course, as therapists, I think we know that the relationship is the most important part of that experience in terms of being a change agent. And I have to wonder how interacting with an AI therapist would really provide the same benefit. And like you said, Eric, it's not the specific individualized intervention and support that you would get with a live therapist that can be more agile in terms of responding to whatever's presenting in the moment. So if somebody put too much faith in what the bot says because they know that it's based on broad data, most people this or most people that, then I suppose that could contribute to a loss of autonomy. That they would give it too much weight as opposed to a more individual approach. I mean, in therapy, I think clients do find it helpful to know that, well, we know this or we know that from research, that people that have your diagnosis or people that have been through your experience, very often what you're experiencing is not abnormal. That is comforting to clients. But I wonder if it's as comforting if it's coming from a bot. I don't know. That's another issue though, than the efficacy of it versus these ethical issues we're talking about. Misdiagnosis. And this really speaks to that same issue of the difference between, collecting data and making an educated guess versus having the person sitting across from you. In clinical settings, is there a risk that clients would be harmed if AI misdiagnoses their symptoms and leads them in the wrong treatment direction? If they're using a bot or something that doesn't have human oversight. What do we think?
I would definitely have to agree there. Clients come into services looking for a diagnosis or trying to get answers as to what may be going on. And if they are giving the wrong information and misdiagnosed, that could be a trickle effect. Even down to if they are looking for medication services, right? If they are misdiagnosed, then that can definitely play a part into the medications that may be most effective for
yeah.
them. So it's definitely something that needs to be looked at, especially if we're going to be taking on what the AI bot says as gold, right? As the standard of care
Mhm.
for these individuals. There definitely has to be some extra oversight in that.
So if we were drilling down to making some kind of recommendation, do we think that any AI product that purports to diagnose someone needs to be, each of those diagnoses needs to be checked by a live clinician? I mean, that would make those products a lot more expensive.
It's like one of those trust but verify moments.
Yeah. The benefits you were describing, Eric, about, privacy and not having anyone, a human person, know about whatever issues you might be discussing, you would lose that if there was human oversight of an AI diagnosis. But I'm not sure how else you guard against the misdiagnosis. I mean, it's not that humans don't ever misdiagnose. We do. But, for somebody who's struggling with their mental health, it seems like that would be a safety feature that could be required. I mean, I don't even know if do these products have to be licensed, like the bot product that your client used, Eric?
Not that I'm aware of. And I was just kind of thinking that, we're talking about if the bot is doing the diagnosing, potentially being wrong. But the other side of that is the AI bots could help people that diagnosing isn't their strong suit as therapists do a better job.
Right, used as an aid to the live therapist. Yeah, that's a different use for it. Yeah, some years ago, I was at the doctor and he had a pharmacy student who was attending with him and had his little handheld computer and was, putting in all the data to decide on the dose for the antibiotic or whatever it was I was there for. And, that was definitely an assisted, you know, medication recommendation anyway. And I know that medicine is using AI extensively to help doctors diagnose. So, but are we headed to where the AI is the expert and they need to check the human and their diagnosis? I mean, what you said, Eric, about somebody that may not be their strong suit.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know the answer to that. I mean, I could wager a guess that there will be a day where, um, you know, what'll be recommended is that whether if you make a diagnosis that you put the things you put in, and the DSM is powered by AI, and that it can actually help you make those diagnoses. I mean, I'm sure that day will come. I'd love to say I won't be able to see it or won't still be practicing, but I don't think that's going to be the case. I'm guessing it'll be out. I'm guessing there'll be an interactive or an AI powered DSM within the next 5 years, maybe 10 at the most.
I think you're right. Absolutely. So that's going to create a whole new um, educational need at the university level for teaching that. And it also will alter how clinicians get supervised for their clinical practice when we have a mechanized or an AI version of DSM. Risk of abandonment. Is there a risk that clients who rely on AI will not receive timely responses and continuity of care, especially during crises? So, I mean, the AI gets hacked it's not, it's down when somebody's having a mental health crisis and needs to consult it.
Even simpler than that, they can't afford their cell phone bill, or they don't have access to high-speed internet, phone breaks, whatever. What more time is people in crisis than when their technology isn't working?
Yeah, exactly. And so again, if we were going to try to imagine recommendations that we might make, it should products that purport to provide this kind of treatment support, should there be a live human available in case of a crisis that could be contacted. Of course, if it's a matter of your cell phone being down, then you're not going to be able to contact a live person either. But that you'll be able to contact them if your phone was down either.
So I'll say there's a product that I currently use in the federal sector that encompasses using televideo to provide mental health services. But prior to the session starting, you have to input emergency contact information. You have to put in your current location, and then you have to lock the session. So the software is already safe in it itself, right? But then you have to lock the session, and that just adds another shield of protection on it. But let's say for some strange, odd reason, you disconnect from the session, or the client's in distress, they're in crisis. The software itself, once you input their current location in an emergency contact number, it automatically calls that emergency contact number, and then it also notifies local law enforcement. So that's something that could possibly be incorporated into AI in some sort. Like if a client's going to be using a bot of some sort, right? They could potentially have some safeguards in there that if the AI does detect crisis, or the client explicitly states that they're in crisis, whatever. I'm tech savvy, but I'm not, right? To me, it's just like speaking all this stuff, but somebody has to put this into play and make this come to life.
If the session disconnects, the program automatically calls.
So it'll prompt us to say, like, was this intentional?
They'll ask
or
you.
Was that yes. Yes. So some way, somehow, right? AI could incorporate something of this sort to just, I guess, get some in-person help, or notify law enforcement, have some safeguards in place. When people discuss AI, I think some people are either totally against it or totally for it. But I just think that there's a lot of nuances that have to be worked out. But I do, like Eric mentioned, I see it happening, and it's happening fast.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, in the example you gave, there is human oversight as to whether or not it is really a crisis, because you wouldn't want a disconnected call to automatically result in a call to 911 or
Right.
988 or whatever. So that still involves having but if it's an all bot or an all AI therapy session, there isn't a human to consult if it gets disconnected to know whether it's a crisis and whether their emergency contact needs to be notified. So that was why I was saying, should there always be
Oversight,
human backup? But I don't know that would be possible with the millions of users that would be using these programs. I don't know what that job would be for you to be the backup for this program. How many potential crises are you going to be dealing with? Well, yeah, a lot to consider. Surveillance, and this one I think is is a big concern to me anyway. How might artificial intelligence data be used for surveillance purposes? For example, in reproductive health data in states where abortion is illegal. And that would be gathering surveillance not just on the client, but on the clinician. What are you saying to the client? You know, that you could be called on. And that really goes back to the basic, how hackable, you know, what are the safeguards? How safe is it to, and the laws of any state about whether such data can be mined if you've got for, you know, criminal activities. Like
There's
whether,
still the
you know,
privileges, like the client clinician privileges, and even when it comes down to subpoenas or you know, appearing for court, there's still that discretion that the clinician gets to uphold. And I don't think the client would get that privilege if they are interacting with a bot. I'm not sure. I'm very intrigued about this.
yeah, there's just so many layers of it to consider. But yeah, I mean, there was actually a bill introduced in Kansas. Fortunately, it didn't get very far, but it was to provide women who were pregnant their like monthly data, and also to track women's periods to see if they get pregnant and be able to track whether or not they were having an abortion or seeking an abortion. So, you know, the idea of mining any input thing that people would input for that kind of oversight and surveillance, I think that's a real risk. I wonder, you know, there's a online tracking programs that women use just to track their own periods, and that was going to be something they were going to, you know, legislate that could be mined to seek out women that maybe had gotten pregnant and were seeking an abortion. I think there's other kinds of data that could also be used that way, surveilled that way. And I don't know how you safeguard against that other than the, you know, cybersecurity measures that we know are there. There's a lot of focus on, but we hear almost every day about breaches of those. I don't know how many times I've gotten notices that my data might have been, you know, lost or might have been breached for one of the insurance companies I provided for, or, you know, whatever it might be. And then you get your free 12 months of monitoring. You know, happens a lot. Where are we here? Okay. Plagiarism and dishonesty. How can social workers prevent plagiarism, dishonesty, and intellectual property abuse that results from the use of artificial intelligence, such as copying and pasting without attribution and credit? I don't know if that would be copying like a script for a group, an online group or something that would be AI powered.
It's more used in the class.
Oh,
No,
sorry.
I was just going to say it's more used in the classroom. Students will type in answers or ask it to type out responses to long questions. They'll also use them for responses to discussion posts, and I've seen them used in like research papers. And there are AI bot checkers, just like there's plagiarism checkers out there, and they're the technology to catch the thief is getting better, but again, the people that are making the money on these kind of things make the money on, hey, you can skate by, get your degree, so they work pretty hard to make those more and more difficult to check.
Yeah, I was just going to add that I had recently read some articles on how much, you know, students are using like GBT and some of those to
To write
use for
papers.
plagiarism. So I'm glad that your point, Eric, that the technology is getting better in catching those, but until it's at a certain level, they're always going to slip through the cracks. I think it's very cautious.
Yeah. So, and where's the line between using, doing internet research and plagiarizing? If you just ask them to provide the answer rather than going and looking for an article about that topic. But yeah, it certainly may ultimately devalue a degree if it becomes harder and harder to detect when people have done that. I mean, you'd like to believe most people would want to do the work and earn the degree on their own, but if it's possible to do that, at least some are going to. At least some are going to get away with that. So I don't know. I guess any of you that have taught or working in academia, what are the rules in your institutions about the use of AI for papers and tests and such? Anybody? I think
Me and another colleague both put in our syllabi that it's expected that they do their own work, that using bots or AI is the same as plagiarism, that there is ways to cite that material, but they need to use the APA guidelines to do that and actually cite the material. And then a colleague actually sets the amount of AI and amount of plagiarism that she'll accept, and it's like less than 20-30%, and puts that in her syllabus as well. The problem is when you have to expel an entire class because they all used AI, then it kind of really put that to her reliance on that percentage to the test, because she had most of her classroom, scored above her percentage. So she has to probably look at adjusting that, because
wow.
the checkers basically said, "Hey, everybody used AI," and maybe they did, maybe they didn't, but it's gonna make things a little more complicated.
So they used one of those AI checkers that you were mentioning to see what percentage of their papers was AI generated,
Correct.
and it was mostly over her 20% or what. I guess I'm puzzled as to why any of it was allowed. If you're expected to do your own work, et cetera, why are you allowed at 20% AI generated work?
Well,
I guess
just
just the
like with
reality.
Well, just like with plagiarism checkers, there's a certain amount of, even if it is your own work, you could indiscriminately land on somebody else's work. You could have not been aware of an article, something like that. So, I mean, it is possible to think you have an original idea and,
Mhm.
support that idea and never run into somebody else who had also had that
So that's
idea.
why.
So,
Yeah.
um, while you have to kind of assume that everything you write down now, somebody else has had that idea and it's potentially on the web, um, you can't automatically assume that everything that is plagiarized or used or according to these bots, because these bots aren't perfect. But these checkers, that you can't assume that they're 100% accurate and assume that the students,
Mhm.
cheated.
So that's why the 20, that makes sense. Yeah, that you'd have to have some wiggle room there. So they're all obviously already, this is being dealt with, and struggled with in academic settings, for uh, trying to leave room for that reality that you just described, but also to try to have some guarantee that people are actually doing their own work. And so, yeah, that I don't know if that would go into a standard that we would want to recommend in terms of we don't really recommend what happens in the academic world, but in the practice world. Dr. Reamer also says social workers need to recognize algorithms' fairness and biases. To what extent do artificial intelligence tools used for clinical purposes and agency hiring exacerbate social, cultural, and political bias as a result of the databases on which they are built? Do the AI algorithms incorporate sufficient information from people of color, LGBTQ plus individuals, low-income individuals, et cetera? So does anybody use any AI products in hiring practices in your agencies to screen or screen out applicants, et cetera? I think most agencies have a hard time getting enough applicants, so that might be a problem. So nobody has a perspective on that one at this point. But I certainly concern for those social justice factors would be important in any social work application of AI, because those programs are based on databases. And what is the database? That's probably a question that any of us should ask before we utilize those products. That speaks to how broadly applicable they are. And then the last thing that he suggested we consider, finally, social workers need to consider potential ethics complaints and litigation. Do social workers who rely on AI risk being named in ethics complaints, such as to the licensing board or to NASW, and in lawsuits alleging, for example, failure to comply with informed consent standards, confidentiality breaches, misdiagnosis, such as over-reliance on AI to diagnose, which would speak to that, the AI DSM, client abandonment or plagiarism. So I think I don't know of any cases yet that have, or lawsuits that are ethics complaints against social workers based on the use of AI. Are any of you aware of any of them? I don't have a hard time believing that will happen at some point in the not too distant future. If somebody feels, as soon as somebody feels they've been harmed by a product that they feel that was recommended to them, or that there were social workers involved in creating that AI product, that they could become legally liable. David, are you aware of any lawsuits of that nature?
I'm not, but that doesn't mean that they have not happened. We're all trying to get better educated on all of the aspects of the artificial intelligence. So.
Well, Eric had told us about a really good workshop that he took on these topics, and unfortunately, it isn't being offered again. I don't think they made a video of it, but I think I would like to see if it was over at KU. So I would like to see if we can ask them to offer it again. And it would certainly be something that would be good for our committee to take to further our knowledge and discussion about this. Out of our discussion today, I don't think we have clear answers, or I haven't heard anyone say that they felt clearly about a standard that we recommend in terms of our policies and our regulations. But I think it's opened up even more questions that I think we need to consider and look at, and with an eye towards having some kind of guidelines, some kind of recommendations for social workers in Kansas about the use of AI. They might be pretty broad, they might be pretty, and they might be outdated as soon as we make them, because this is moving so fast. But I think it's clearly that's the reason we need to keep looking at it, and because it is going to become more and more prevalent in the practice of social work, I think. Okay, any other comments, questions about these many topics on AI that we've been discussing? Okay, great.
I just
Yeah, yeah.
I wanted to thank you for going through that. This is kind of a difficult topic to get, for me at least, my head around in terms of how can we approach this. It's really a relevant topic, but I appreciate the way that you did that and led that discussion, because I thought those were nice, helpful points to kind of view it through those lenses, so we could start to kind of tackle, and I appreciate your follow-up questions too, in terms of, how can we address this part of it, or, so. Really appreciate you doing that with the advisory committee today.
Yeah. Well, another possibility would be to ask Dr. Reamer to do a virtual, a Zoom workshop for us as well. KNSW had him do an ethics workshop some years ago, and it was excellent. So I know that he would do a really good job. So we might reach out to him as well. He's retired from the university now, but he's still teaching giving workshops, I know. Okay, the next thing under old business was our discussion about adding a description of each profession to the BSRB website to inform the public of the differences between the professions. So I know I always had kind of a spiel about all the different professions when people would ask me for referrals, etc. But I wanted to ask all of you, how do you explain to people the difference between social work and the other mental health professions that the BSRB governs? How do you tell people what's different about it from the other professions?
This is a trick question because oftentimes I just say that, social workers do it the best. But
well, of course, that goes without saying.
I think there's just like a holistic approach to what we do as well. We look at person and environment. We are very strengths based. We incorporate many aspects of the individual's life into their care, and we try to have as many people join in on the person's care that the person's willing to have, right? So there's just a different approach to how we go about helping sustain individuals' mental health in life.
Yeah.
I've tried to explain the tasks that people would see, like maybe a marriage and family therapist, they might see a person alone, but in the context of a relationship. Whereas social work, we're not just like psychology might be the inner workings of the mind. We're looking at what's going on in that person's environment as well. And so I try to explain, when would you go here? When would you go here? Or how we're all different. And then I say we're the best.
Of course. Of course. Definitely always recommend.
Yeah, a lot of times what I do is kind of similar, and I talk with them about sort of the educational underpinnings of each of the models, and I'll talk about how that, marriage and family therapists, they receive a lot of training in couples, group families, groups, et cetera, that psychologists get a lot more training in assessment, testing, diagnostics. Social workers are more of a generalist, and then counselors kind of fall in between what a social worker and a psychologist, because they can do a little bit of testing, they can do a little bit of kind of the person and environment perspective. So I just talk a lot about, when they're asking, is sort of what are the educational underpinnings of the differences. Even when I do lectures about it with students at the bachelor level, they're trying to make a decision where to go. I use that as kind of the way to explain the differences between the professions.
Yeah. Yeah, I like that, including the educational underpinnings. I usually use the person environment perspective and I'll give an illustration. As a clinician, I saw people in my office, but I also attended IEP meetings. I also, met with other people that were caring for the client. I also would invite them to invite family members or other people they were in a relationship with that they might be having issues with into a session or two, as you were saying, Christy, including more of the people in their environment. So, trying to give practical examples of where a social worker might try to help you in a different way than some of the other professions. I think for this purpose, if we were going to include something on the BSRB website, we wouldn't be allowed to say that we're the best. But we all know that, but we wouldn't be allowed to say that. So the question is, how would we create that that description that would not say as compared to, but would just speak to, this is how social workers interact with their clients or the environment or their community, because of course we also have micro, macro, meso, and macro level ways of practicing social work. So it's not just social workers don't just do clinical therapy. But for the purposes of the website, should we just be talking about LSCSWs or LMSWs that are practicing? Should we just be talking about clinicians, because people would be looking on the website to find out what's different if I go see a social worker for therapy, because people don't go to the BSRB website to find out what meso and macro social workers do, or what social worker, even medical social workers or people that aren't doing, they're looking to compare to the other mental health professions on the BSRB website. So
maybe, but not necessarily, because if they have a complaint about a bachelor level social worker, I would go to the website to look up and see how they're qualified. And then you also have to take into account, then David can correct me or tell me the numbers, but I think the vast majority of licensed social workers in Kansas are at the bachelor level, unless I'm just completely wrong in that regard. So you would basically be deleting off over half the profession in this particular state, and I would guess that's similar across multiple states.
but we need to have then a separate definition of what a bachelor's level social worker does. If people are looking to figure out if someone is practicing within their scope.
Well, and in terms of our numbers of licensees, there's actually quite a bit more master's level and clinical than bachelor's right now. Right now in Kansas, there's about 4,128 at the master's level, 3,109 at the clinical level, but only about 1,160 at the bachelor's level. But that is also a distinction between the social work profession versus the others, that some of the other professions don't have an independent level of permanent license below a master's, what a master's level would require. So having that bachelor's level permanent license is a little unique. There's the assistant behavior analyst, there's the licensed addiction counselors for the addiction counselor profession that are also a bachelor's level. But in a lot of the other ones, licensed psychologist, PhD, and then a lot of the other ones require a master's degree. So, and it is also unique that we have our 4 licensed associate social workers. That's more of a remnant of the past. When the BSRB was formed back in 1980, we were able to continue to renew any individuals who had an associate level social work license, but we were not able to issue new licenses since that point. So that number has decreased, but that small group of practitioners does still exist. But in regarding your point, yeah, a lot of this conversation could look at scope of practice, although for the different levels, if you go through our statutes and regulations, there's definitely more that we could add under the scope of practice for the different levels of licensing. Right now, I included in your packet a copy of KSA 65-6302, which has the technical legal definition for social work practice. But there's a lot of language in that definition that doesn't necessarily relate to all levels of social work practice. And so thought that might be helpful for you as another way of framing this conversation.
So the website already has all the regs, and those specific legal definitions would be already on there. I thought that we were talking about giving a definition, a broader definition of the profession, and how social work, what's unique about social work, what's different about social work than the other professions. But I think, yes, because we have licensed bachelor's level social workers, I think it would be important to include a description of what a bachelor's level social worker does and is licensed to do. In case, there's somebody that wants to check that out for whatever reason, either because they're thinking about going into the profession or because they have a concern about, what care they may have received from a social worker at that level. So the question is, what's our jumping off point? Do we start with those legal definitions? Do we look at what NASW says? They have a definition of bachelor's level and master's level, clinical level. How should we approach this task? Does anybody have an idea about that?
To me, it's I'm like kind of wanting to represent what social work is in our description. I heard, like generalist, and inclusion is very important. And so I think our description would want to be not so general, it's useless, but inclusive of anything. And that's what I love about social work, is that you can do so much with a social work degree that you might be a little more limited if you went with something else. And so is it possible to have that description be representative of our values, of who we are?
Yeah, I like that. I think that, and I think our focus on inclusiveness and social justice and advocacy is unique amongst other professions that deal with people in various types of need.
I will say the NASW's definition really is pretty good. It says social workers seek to improve the lives of others. Social work is a profession for those with a strong desire to help improve people's lives. Social workers assist people by helping them cope with issues in their everyday lives, deal with their relationships, and solve personal and family problems.
Yeah. I think that's a good basic framework to.
I like that as well.
But if I were a consumer looking to figure out which type of practitioner to seek out help from, I guess I'd want a little bit more specifics in that. I want to add to that about maybe something about at a bachelor's level social worker might do these kinds of tasks or jobs to help you. Licensed master's level social worker and LSCSW, so that they can distinguish. I mean, I thought that was what we were trying to do, because I don't know what the professional association descriptions of the other professions would be, but they would probably include several of those components, I would think.
Yeah, so we would have just a general overview about what is a social worker, and then breaking that down by level. So what's the difference between an LMSW and an LSCSW, an LBSW?
Yeah, that's what I would want to add to it, and not a treatise on it, but a sentence or two about each level of how a person licensed at that level would implement that broader description of what social workers do. There's lots of different ways to accomplish that. So maybe one way to do this would, if we would have a volunteer to take a stab at each of those three levels. If we are going to tentatively agree that we would use the NASW description, and then give a closer description of those three levels. How does everybody feel about that approach?
This is Lee. That sounds good to me.
I think it's a good way for us to approach it, and we can see what we come up with the 3 levels and tweak it further if we need to, the structure of it. David, has the other professions, have they come up with their definitions yet, or are they? No?
Not yet. We've had similar discussions, and I think they're going to be working on putting together that language, but nobody has returned language yet.
Okay, so we don't know how big these descriptions are yet. Okay.
I think
Well, we were the leaders on the survey, so we can be the leaders on this too, right?
yeah, and Cynthia, I think we're looking at maybe like 2 paragraphs.
Yeah,
somewhere.
okay. That's what I was thinking too. So that's good. Not a huge amount. Okay, so do I have a volunteer that maybe would take a stab at the bachelor's level social work description?
I can do that.
Thank you, Catherine. Appreciate that very much. And then do I have someone that would take a stab at the LMSW description of what an LMSW might do, or how they might implement that broader description?
I can do that.
Thank you, Christy.
Once I figure out what I do, then I'll talk about what.
Yeah, exactly. Is anyone else LSCSW? Eric is. How do you? I know you've got a lot going on. Would you want to take on that description, or if you don't feel like you can squeeze that in with your 14 other jobs you have, I'd be happy to take a stab at it.
I'm gonna let you take a stab at this one because I'm already working on doing the supervision
Right, we're working
contract
on that.
thing. So
Mhm.
working on that too. And then like
Okay.
I said, I'm spread a little thin right now. I don't think it'll take very long, but I'm gonna let you go for it.
Okay. All right. I will take a stab at that. And I would just ask that each of us bring those initial ideas or written descriptions back to our next meeting, which is going to be on October 1st, I believe.
And Cynthia, I can help you with the LSCSW. Is there another level that we're missing that we want to put out there?
Associate.
The associate, which we have struggled to define what an associate is qualified to do. So, and there are only 4 of them right now. Now, Dave and I talked the other day about a possible use for that degree, or that license, but it's far off from being anything that's clear or settled at this point. So I don't know if we want to put anything in there about LASW right now, since no one new is being licensed at that level. So there are essentially 4 people in the state that have that. And are they
Yeah.
practicing even anymore?
So I think I'd probably focus on the LBSW, LMSW, and the clinical level. And I do know that there is one of the Canadian provinces that is looking at starting up the LASW again. So if I get something from them, and between now and then, I'll kind of
Good.
bring it back.
Okay.
Do we
Yeah.
want to do the doctorate level?
Oh, yes, maybe. I guess we should.
That
But
is the LSCSW.
that's not another level of licensure, though.
It's not just a different, because often I'll get the question like, what can a social worker do with a doctorate? I mean, a lot of it is more in academia, but I don't know if.
So in academia, so you open up another can of worms with that though, because you have a DSW and you have a PhD.
Right.
So the clinical license is essentially terminal, right? You can still teach with the clinical license. It just depends on what you want to do with
Mhm.
it. So pursuing that doctoral level would just be of your choice, right? But I definitely think it could be worth noting, but you would fall into the 2 different tracks of that.
So does someone offer a PhD in social work?
Mhm.
I only know about the DSW. I didn't realize there was a school.
University of Kansas does a PhD.
They do. Oh, when did they? Because it used to be they just had DSW, I thought. Maybe they've always had a PhD. Okay, yeah, I think we should probably have a sentence or two about that level of social work practice, since it is another, and there's a lot more DSWs or PhD social workers than there are LASWs. So, okay, all right, that's great. I think we got a couple more minutes. So let's look at on new business. Well, at our planning retreat, the BSRB will be discussing if there's any legislative initiatives we want to put forth in the next session. Am I saying that right, David?
That's right.
And so we wanted to ask if there were any recommendations to the board for the legislative agenda. I have suggested and will be talking to the full board about trying to reverse an amendment that was put on the last bill that we had that passed that watered down the amount of clinical hours that are required for the LSCSW. So it didn't change the number of hours, and I think David attached the actual wording to your email on that. Can you share your screen, David, and put that up for us?
Sure, and there's a copy of this in your material too. Basically, I just highlighted some of the language that was changed in, actually, let me go ahead and, so back in 2023, there was some language that was, there was originally a bill put forward by the BSRB with some changes, some of our licensure requirements. There was an amendment that was added in one of the committees that would change some of the requirements for individuals seeking a clinical specialist social work license. And so this is the language in your packet of material. I wanted to highlight some of the changes that were in that amendment. Previously, the statute for including in the requirements for that specialist clinical social work level had included a lot of the requirements for the master's level social work. So it builds on that. So this requirement here in A, it references those. But additionally, there was language that talked about completing 15 credit hours in these 5 different course areas. The amendment struck reference to 4 of those courses, leaving only pathology or psychopathology. And then there was some additional language that talked about previously you had to complete a supervised clinical practicum, including psychotherapy and assessment. And there was some language that was added in the amendment that changed that to including but not limited to psychotherapy and assessment. There was also some language that basically said not only integrating diagnosis, it said or diagnostic impression. And then that was added under here in section D. So basically the 3,000 hours, including 1,500 hours of direct client contact, which previously said the 1,500 hours had to be in psychotherapy and assessment, but that was changed to the 1,500 hours would include but be not limited to psychotherapy and assessment. And then there was the similar language about integrating diagnosis or diagnostic impression. That is what you have in your packet of material. I just included that section because that was a section that had that amended language that got put into law. So thought I would highlight that for you today.
Thank you. So I don't have a problem with the diagnostic impression piece being added because the rationale that was given is that some people were working in agencies where they were not required to give a formal diagnosis as you might for an insurance company, but that they were, being taught about diagnosis and were being asked to give a diagnostic impression. So that's still learning about diagnosis and treatment and practicing it. What I have a problem with is a licensed specialist clinical social worker not having to have all their training in clinical social work. I know there's all kinds of different ways that people can practice social work, but if you have your LSCSW, you are authorized to diagnose and treat mental disorders. And I don't believe this made us the only profession with an independent clinical license that does not require all of their postgraduate supervised practice to be in clinical practice. And I think that is not good for the public. That's watering. This all came behind, wanting to increase the number of available providers because the legislators were well aware that we had a shortage of mental health providers in the state. And so they were willing to do pretty much anything that might increase the number of providers. But I don't think giving people an LSCSW who have not had appropriate training, have not had the same level of training as all the other independently licensed mental health professions, or as LSCSWs have had to do for decades now, that I don't think that is solving the problem of providing more competent mental health providers. So I would like to reverse that or take that out. And I don't know how that would happen in a legislative sense, but this is something that I would like to propose for our legislative agenda. So I'd like to hear any comments or from the rest of you about that.
I agree, Cynthia. Thanks for bringing this up. And the one thing that just came to mind, and I don't recall, David and Cynthia, if we've touched on this before, so my apologies, but wondering what the possibility would be about adding another level. I know we're talking about the ACSW, is that what it is? But adding another one that would, so you would still keep your LSCSW, all of the diagnoses and the requirements would stay the same, but then adding another level that is getting more to this language here, that you're still practicing but there's just not such an emphasis on the clinical component.
Like a licensed specialist independent social worker.
Right.
Yes.
Or
Yes.
generalist, licensed generalist, social worker, specialist, generalist, whatever. However, the statute does allow for other specialties, but the only one that's ever been created is LSCSW. And some of the people that testified when they pushed this through was that, oh, well, a lot of LSCSWs don't practice clinically. Well, we know that's true, but they're authorized to. And I think that's not a safe thing. So, but I think creating a whole other specialty would require another statute, wouldn't it, David?
It would, I believe.
So we could propose that, I guess.
Yeah, this current language is in statute, so it is in law. So if you wanted to modify this or create something next to it, it would also need to be put forward in a bill before the legislature.
So we'd have to decide what type of specialty license we wanted to propose that would give those that wanted that high. I think a lot of the people, the reason that this got proposed was they wanted, some agencies will pay more for people that have their LSCSW, even if they're not practicing clinically. And then they're able to supervise others. And some people just want to get the highest level of licensure, which I understand, but I don't think it's appropriate to provide that level of licensure if you haven't really acquired the same level of training that all the other independently licensed mental health professions have. So what would we, well, we're probably out of time to discuss that, but can we talk about what kind of a specialist license we'd want to propose? Because they're
Dave, does the ASWB still have the advanced generalist exam?
They do. Yes, that's another category of exam they offer. Mhm.
So
go ahead.
I was going to say maybe we could look at that and see what other states have. in
This
that
is,
regard.
this is a license in another state you were talking about?
Well, it's a different exam. It's an advanced generalist exam instead of the clinical exam.
Who
that
offers that?
For an independent generalist license instead of clinical. Because if
But
they do clinical work, they're probably not going to pass the exam.
what, who offers that, the advanced generalist exam?
I'm sorry, ASWB.
Oh, I didn't know about that.
Mhm.
Well, that would be the logical path then if we were going to create a specialist generalist license. There already exists an exam.
So I would love to see us pursue something like that. And then, I mean, so you could get your generalist, and then if you really wanted to get the LSCSW, you still could do that, but you would have a requirement to do a certain
The
amount
clinic.
of diagnoses and all of the training for that.
Yeah. So I like that idea of proposing a new specialist category alongside changing that, taking that language out that waters down what the clinical license requires, in terms of how much clinical training they have to actually have. Is this something we need to take a vote on, David, or is this something that Andrea and I can just carry to the board meeting?
So you do still have 7 members in attendance. You have quorum. You could take a vote on it today, or you could see if there's consensus to kind of bring that forward as sort of an alternate change to what is currently in the law. So those are your kind of options. At that meeting of the board, any of the topics can be brought up by board members. So you could forward it from a recommendation today, or you could go ahead and bring it up at the board meeting, either way.
Do those of us that are here, do you feel ready to take a vote on that, or do you feel like you need more information before you would want to put that forward, or to have Andrea and I put it forward at the board meeting? If I ask for a vote now, will that work for everybody?
Yes.
So the two issues are to change the language that was added in the last bill we put forth back to what it was before, that you have to have the 1,500 hours of diagnosis and treatment out of the 3,000 hours that you need. And the second piece is to propose a specialist generalist, or generalist specialist, however we word it, a social work license, that then you would take that generalist exam, and there would have to be, regulations written for that about what all is required for that. But it would be an alternative path for people to get a specialist license that doesn't kind of water down the LSCSW. So all in favor of us making that recommendation to the BSRB for our legislative agenda when we meet next month, please say aye.
Aye.
Thank you. Any opposed? Okay, great. Andrea and I will take that forward. So thank you all for staying past our appointed hour. And we will look forward to seeing you again on October 1st. And David will be sending out the reminder for that.
Yeah. Just want to make a brief comment about that. Some of you who've been on the advisory committee, you have a calendar appointment for a different date. Originally, the meeting was going to be about a week later, but due to a conflict, we had to reschedule the next date for the advisory committee. So yeah, your next advisory committee meeting will be on Tuesday, October 1st, 2024. For those that already have a Zoom meeting announcement, I'll just go ahead and move that as a calendar appointment. So it should show up on the new date of October 1st.
Okay. Thanks very much. Everybody have a great rest of your day.
Thank you. You too. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.